When I first moved out on my own, I discovered something I hadn't expected. Freedom doesn't just feel like fresh air or open time. Freedom has a sound. For me, it was the quiet rhythm of my footsteps tapping across pavement long after the rest of the world had gone still. I didn't walk at night for exercise. I didn't walk because I had anywhere to go. I walked simply because I could, because nobody could stop me. Nobody could tell me it was too late or too dark or too unsafe. For once, every step belonged entirely to me. I loved those walks more than I loved almost anything else. They weren't just strolls. They were tiny, private escapes. A chance to slip into the cool night air whenever the walls of my apartment started to feel too close, to let my thoughts drift as far as my feet carried me. I'd pull on my coat, tuck my hands into my pockets, put in my headphones, and breathe in that perfect late-night quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath just for you. And out of all the routes I walked, there was one I loved most. It passed a college campus first, the warm glow of study room windows spilling across the path. Then it stretched down a long, straight road that always felt like a tunnel of orange light. After that, it curved toward a forgotten industrial estate, shadowy science buildings, silent office blocks, metal fences that hummed quietly in the cold. Beyond that, the sidewalk narrowed, pressed between tall warehouse walls on one side and flat, endless farmland on the other. The land stretched so far, it dissolved into a thin black line of trees beneath the night sky. By the time I looped home, whatever weight had been sitting in my chest always felt a little lighter. Those walks made me feel human again. I usually went between 10 and midnight, late enough that the road felt private, early enough that I knew I wasn't stranded out there alone. There were always a few cars, a few students heading home late after studying, the occasional night shift worker trudging toward their car. Enough movement to remind me there were still people in the world, but not enough to disturb my peace. The night this happened, my boyfriend, now my husband, was staying over. Let's call him Chris. We'd stayed up talking until almost 1 in the morning, drifting in that warm, half-sleepy space where time doesn't quite seem real and the world outside your window feels far away. I suggested a walk. Chris hesitated, said it was too late, said the road would probably be empty, but I shrugged it off. I had walked that road dozens of times without anything strange happening. Empty was the whole point. Eventually, he sighed, grabbed his coat, and followed me outside. It was the kind of autumn night that sits crystal clear in your memory. The air was sharp and cold, making each breath feel clean. A thin layer of frost glittered across the pavement, catching the orange streetlights like scattered glass, the kind of cold that makes being outside feel peaceful and makes the warmth inside afterward feel even better. But as we walked, I noticed something unusual. The road was quieter than normal. Not silent, but emptier, hollow, as if the night was waiting for something. One car passed near the start of our walk, then nothing. We stuck close together, our voices hushed without meaning to be. We talked about unimportant things, but they felt important in that moment. Little confessions, hopes, memories, the kind of conversation you only have when you're falling for someone and the night feels endless. Halfway down the long road, a sudden shriek cracked through the air behind us. A single, sharp, high-pitched cry, the unmistakable sound of a bird, but eerily close to a human scream. We jumped, laughed nervously, brushed it off. "It's an omen," I said. "It's telling us not to turn back." I had no idea how right I was. A few minutes later, I noticed a figure ahead of us, far down the road. At first, it barely registered. Just a silhouette moving in and out of the hazy orange light. A man, hoodie, tracksuit bottoms, walking the same direction we were, slowly, unevenly. At first, I thought he was drunk, the way he wandered from one side of the road to the other, swaying slightly, stumbling every few steps. It seemed obvious, and a drunk man didn't scare me. Drunk people are predictable, loud, sloppy, usually more danger to themselves than anyone else. But after a few moments, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. He wasn't swaying because he was drunk. He was drifting because he kept looking back at us, not glancing, not curious. He twisted his head at these sharp, deliberate angles, long enough to make sure we were still behind him, long enough that I felt the weight of his stare even from far away. A coldness slid down my spine, starting at the base of my neck and spreading across my body so quickly I felt breathless. It wasn't fear at first. Not exactly. It was instinct. Something primal. Something older than thought. My body had recognized danger before my mind had caught up. Chris slowed a little. I slowed too. Up ahead was the wide open turn into the industrial estate I usually took. Brightly lit, safer. But before that turn, tucked beside a tall roadside sign, was a narrow footpath that cut behind one of the office buildings. During the day, workers used it to cross from the main road to the back gate. At night, it was supposed to be closed. The sign that blocked the start of the path was only about 5.5 feet tall. During the summer, that height allowed flowers and bushes behind it to spill out over the sidewalk. But during fall, when everything had died back, the sign cast a short, thick shadow on the pavement, just large enough that if someone crouched behind it, you wouldn't see them unless you were almost right beside it. We watched as the man crossed the road. Then he stepped behind the sign. Chris whispered, "Did he just go into the bushes?" I angled my head, praying, absurdly, that I wouldn't see him again. Because if he wasn't on the sidewalk, that meant he'd gone down the side path. That meant he wasn't waiting for us. That meant he wasn't our problem. For one hopeful second, the sidewalk was empty. Then a pair of headlights appeared at the far end of the road. The light swept across the pavement, climbed the metal sign, and spilled underneath it. That's when I saw them. Legs, bent at the knees, folded tight beneath a crouched body. A darker shape pressed into the shadow at the base of the sign, hiding, waiting. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I didn't think. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. My stomach dropped so violently it felt like I'd stepped off a cliff. My hands shook so hard I had to curl them into my sleeves to hide it. If we hadn't slowed down, if we hadn't hesitated, if I hadn't looked, we would have walked right past him without ever knowing he was there. We turned around immediately. But we didn't run. Some instinct deeper than fear whispered that running would trigger him. Running would flip some hidden switch from patience to pursuit. He was bigger than both of us. Faster. If he charged, we wouldn't have a chance. So we walked. Fast. Rigid. Silent. Every nerve in my back burning, waiting to feel a hand grab me. I looked back once. He was in the road now. Not stumbling, not unsteady, not pretending. Walking, crossing toward our side, matching our pace, keeping us close enough to watch. Chris quietly booked an Uber on his phone. It would take a few minutes of forcing ourselves not to run, not to shout, not to look terrified. Behind us, I heard the soft tap of his shoes on the pavement, a slow, deliberate rhythm, the kind of sound that says, "I'm still here, I'm not done." He drifted toward the shadows along the bushes, hugging the dark edges of the sidewalk. He never spoke, never called out, never hurried. The silence around us felt thick and suffocating. I looked back again. He was gone. The emptiness behind us was somehow worse. When headlights finally turned the corner ahead of us, relief hit me so sharply my knees nearly gave out. The Uber, our escape, our lifeline. The moment we saw it slowing, we broke into a run. The moment we ran, I heard him. Footsteps, fast, hard, close. He was coming out of the shadows at full speed. We reached the Uber first. The doors unlocked as we grabbed the handles and practically threw ourselves inside. I slid into the far seat, shaking so hard I could barely close the door. Chris was on the side closest to the man. For a few agonizing seconds, the only thing between Chris and that man was a thin sheet of car window glass. The man slowed as he reached the car, his face obscured by the dark, his posture strange, leaning forward like something not entirely human trying to mimic a human stance. Then the doors locked. The car surged forward, and as we turned, I saw him one last time, standing dead in the center of the road, staring at us, perfectly still except for the faint rise and fall of his shoulders. Then, without any urgency at all, he jogged back into the bushes and disappeared. The Uber driver muttered something like, "Jesus," shook his head, and sped us away. When we got home, we called campus security for the nearby college, terrified some student would take the same route, make the same mistake. Then we called the police. But what could we give them? A man in a hoodie, gray tracksuit bottoms, no face, no voice, Nothing useful. The operator sounded irritated, like we'd interrupted something more important. They said they would send someone. No one ever followed up. The days afterward were worse than the night itself. Chris couldn't stop thinking about him. What if we saw him again? What if he recognized us? What if he'd seen me walk that route before? What if he'd been waiting for someone specific, someone predictable, someone like me? And then Chris said something that still keeps me awake sometimes. He wasn't trying to scare us, he said. He was trying not to be seen. That was when everything clicked. That road was too isolated, too empty, too quiet. If he wanted to rob someone, he'd go to the town center. But he didn't. He chose a place where no one would hear anything. A place where footsteps echo, but screams don't. I started leaving the lights on at home, checking behind doors, in closets, under the bed. Every shadow felt like it was holding its breath. Every quiet moment felt like it might break open. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is silent and I'm lying awake in bed, I think about how close it came, how easily the timing could have been different. If we hadn't slowed down, if I hadn't looked behind me one more time, if that car hadn't passed and illuminated the sign at the perfect second, we would have walked right past him, a few feet away from a crouched stranger waiting for someone, anyone, to come close enough to grab, close enough to disappear. And the worst part is knowing we never would have seen him, not until it was too late.